Hello my dear friends and welcome back to another video. I wasn't originally going to post today because of course episode 6 comes out in just a few hours time. I'm going to be doing a breakdown review as usual, but there is some massive information from Leslye Headland which changes everything. As we go into the last 3 episodes, and especially episode 8, in a couple of weeks time, we have some fantastic news for fans of Star Wars Legends. Now before we dive into it, please do me a big favour, hit the subscribe button down below, it really helps out. We're trying to grow this amazing community and I really need your help. We would be honoured if you would join us. So no more jibber jabber, let's begin. In a brand new interview, and I don't know if this is because they're trying to get more fans into the Acolyte, if they're trying to do some kind of damage control or something like that, Leslye unveiled something massive. In my previous video, I covered how she was saying the Qimir reveal, him being the Sith, is not the biggest aspect of the show. She wasn't kidding, because she now implies there are 2 Sith. This goes back to my theory that Qimir is the apprentice. He was looking for an acolyte, but of course the apprentice has a master. Making StarWars.net a few months ago did say the real Sith of the show do not take Qimir's character seriously, which implies whoever is the big bad is yet to be unveiled. And Leslye said this. Now in the second half of the season, the pieces are all on the board. And when asked if we're going to see more stuff from Star Wars Legends, she says, the other Legends stuff we can talk about after the finale. Are we going to see Darth Tenebrous? Maybe an aged up Darth Plagueis? Some have wondered if Qimir is the canon version of Darth Venamis. And Leslye Headland also seems to imply that our theory that Qimir might be the first Ren, the one who inspires the Knights of Ren later in the timeline, is true, because she said the Kylo Ren theme we heard at the end of episode 5 is deliberate, but she isn't going to tell us why just yet. So for those who are thinking, well, the Sith in this show aren't really all what they're made out to be, Qimir is a cool character but he doesn't feel like a big bad, a big Sith, that seems to be very intentional. I think we're in for a massive surprise in a couple of weeks with episode 8. So I really wanted to put this out. And you know, staying on the subject of the Acolyte, there is an article going round I wanted to cover and give you my thoughts on. This is an opinion piece and it's not in isolation. It's something I've seen many fans on social media echo. And it's the sentiment that the Acolyte continues a long, tragic Star Wars tradition, ruining the Jedi. And needless to say, their portrayal across various projects has been very different. Some did it much better than others. I'm thinking of the Ahsoka show, the final season of the Clone Wars, Luke in The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. Kanan Jarrus is one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived and is severely underrated. But they're talking about times where the Jedi were done wrong. Luke in The Last Jedi, that creative choice, even Obi-Wan to an extent in his own series, and other times, the Acolyte to them being the most recent. Forbes starts by saying this, remember when the Jedi were cool? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. It's been such a very long time. Long before Disney took over Lucasfilm and the Star Wars IP. I've had this running thought through my head lately. You can have too much of a good thing. It's the whole less is more notion. And it applies in a very big way, not just to Star Wars, but to a lot of our beloved genre fiction. So this first bit is the part of the article I do agree with. Now, I am the Bendu, the one in the middle. I'm going to be very fair, and there are parts of this I very much disagree with. But this first bit, I do understand this point of view. Disney, especially during the High Republic, could have handled the mystique of the Jedi a bit better, and this also applies for the books and the comics, the latter of which I'm up to date with. The main contention of this article is the fact the Jedi were always meant to have a mysticism. They were of course negotiators and to an extent soldiers of the Republic, guardians of peace and justice. And this article believes that, in the High Republic and specifically the Acolyte, they're nothing like that. There isn't that pride to them that I guess eras like the Old Republic used to have. They're more reckless, goofy, out there, and there is no sense of these being a monkish order of adherence to the light side of the Force. But there's also the consideration, the High Republic was always aimed to show the eventual destruction of the Jedi through their downfalls and through their failings, and how it started very early on. And this is nothing new. That was always the goal, considering they were setting up the eventual destruction of the Order. And consider this quote from the Revenge of the Sith novelization. This truth, Yoda, the Avatar of Light, Supreme Master of the Jedi Order. He just didn't have it. He never had it. He had lost before he started. He lost before he was born, because the Sith had changed. The Sith had grown, had adapted, had reinvented themselves, and invested 1,000 years intensive study into every aspect of not only the Force, but Jedi lore itself, in preparation for exactly this day. Whereas the Jedi had spent the same millennium training to refight the last war, the Sith evolved, the Jedi didn't. So, in a sense, the High Republic was always going to show the Jedi in a way that was leading up to their prequel depiction, their failings, their downfalls. And that's what you expect in a show like The Acolyte. I have a problem with the Sith revealing themselves to the Jedi like this, and I've spoken about that in my last breakdown, but they are right in this article in saying there isn't the mystique. And maybe to an extent, across various shows, they should put more emphasis on the less is more. That being said, let's carry on. They say, writing over at IGN, Scott Kalura has a very good piece about how the Acolyte's Jedi went out, quote, like punks in the 5th episode, and what this says about the Jedi in modern Star Wars. He notes that as the franchise has evolved, removing the mystery of the Jedi has also hobbled the power of the legendary warriors from a storytelling and dramatic standpoint. Well, here's the thing. While I do see this point, to be pedantic, to look at the lore, in regards to the other Jedi that were killed by Qimir, if Qimir is being trained by Darth Tenebrous or aged up Darth Plagueis, I'm not surprised he was able to wipe the floor with them. Yord, for example, was a recently appointed knight. They've had no experience with dark side users. They barely seem to know what the Sith are. They haven't seen them in hundreds of years. They weren't prepared for a situation like this, not trained for a situation like this. So in the context of this time, I'm not surprised someone as powerful as Qimir, with his cortosis, with his use of Tricata, could destroy these pretty feeble Jedi. Jeki Lon did put up a fight. It's more a case of the fact that Jedi during the High Republic, none of these being council members, were not prepared for a Sith, even if he is just the apprentice. Just watch the strength and the power he had. There was no way they were stopping that. This article goes on to talk about Obi-Wan, even from the standpoint of the showrunner of the series. These Jedi are not meant to be compared to the likes of Qui-Gon Jinn, or Yoda, or Obi-Wan, or Anakin, or Luke. I do have my grievances with this series, and I think the way that they didn't get us to care about these characters in the slightest before their deaths is one of the show's biggest sins so far, but I don't think we were supposed to compare them to some of the greatest Jedi who ever lived. And the High Republic Jedi are a very different type of Jedi to those around during the end of the Republic. The prequel trilogy, which The Acolyte is a precursor to, has plenty of it, and the creatives on the series wanted to show us how powerful the Sith was. And most of the Jedi who died were Padawan and Knights. So I get this point of view, but in terms of that episode ruining the Jedi, there are many other projects and instances you would have had a problem with first, before coming to that conclusion in the 5th. I don't think that episode itself ruins the legendary portrayal of the Jedi. So that's my take on this. They go on to say, not everyone can be Luke Skywalker. This is on stark display in the Acolyte's 5th episode when 5 fully trained Jedi are taken out in just a few seconds by the Master. On top of this, he points out that Carrie-Anne Moss's master Indara was killed in the first few minutes of the show. And 2 other Jedi Masters, including the Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka, that's 10 Jedi slaughtered in this show, and Sol very nearly one of them. The Jedi are basically terrible at this. Okay, so look, I understand this grievance, but I think this article is missing the context. Master Indara, I agree. I don't think she should have died in that scene. I really lament the fact we didn't get more Space Trinity. But Torbin, whatever happened on Brendok, it haunted him. He voluntarily took the poison. There was no fight. If he wanted to fight, it's clear that Torbin was a powerful Jedi, but he took the Barash vow and he submitted to May and said, I'm sorry, May, and he drinks the poison, and that's the end of him. Kelnaka was killed by the stranger, lightsaber through the chest. My grievance in that instance is that it was off screen, but, you know, he had those drawings all around his house on Kofar. He was clearly tormented by Brendok. He may have given in willingly. But even if he fought, Qimir is powerful. That much is evident. Leslye Headland right off the bat wanted to show us how powerful the Sith are.